All right, I'd like to call to order the January 8th, 2024 Mountlake Terrace Planning Commission meeting to order. Would you please take the roll?
Chair Batista.
Here.
So sorry. Vice Chair Harrison is not yet online. Commissioner Thompson.
Here.
Commissioner Landis.
Here.
Commissioner Morgan.
Here.
Commissioner Stenson.
Here.
Commissioner Betcher.
Present.
All right. So
And Commissioner Harrison has just signed in.
Oh, great.
Yay.
Let's go ahead and make sure that he.
Here. Oh, can you hear me?
Yep. All right, we'll take that as a affirmative
here.
for attendance that he can hear us. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to item number 3, approval of the December 11th, 2023 minutes. Does anybody have any changes or corrections to those? I'm not hearing or seeing any, so we'll go ahead and declare those accepted as presented. Item number 4, public comment. Does anybody have any public comment for any item that is not on tonight's agenda? Okay, so I'm going to make the executive decision that we're going to move on from public comment and move to the next item on our agenda tonight. And it's item number 5, continued the public hearing of the zoning text amendment for private recreational facilities, MTMC 19.15.190, 19.23, 19.30, and 19.135.060.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm here to discuss the zoning text amendment. So I'll be going through the staff report, starting with the background, going over the proposal, covering SEPA, Department of Commerce, and written public comments again, comprehensive plan, zoning, and land use overview very quickly. And then I'll spend most of the time tonight talking about some new staff analysis since staff has met with the applicant to discuss their proposal and revise it, provide a staff recommendation, and then the applicant will have an opportunity to present. We'll open the public hearing back up, and then, opportunity for Planning Commission discussion. All right, so to refresh your memory, a zoning text amendment is a change to the zoning code. They are not site or project specific, and the zoning text can be changed at any time as long as it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. This is a legislative decision, so City Council's decision-making authority with Planning Commission's recommendation. So in the summer, we received an application from Forest Crest Athletic Club for a zoning text amendment. Their proposal was submitted to the Department of Commerce, and that comment period ended December 4th of last year. And then we had 2 Planning Commission work sessions in November, a public hearing in December, and then we are continuing the public hearing today. All right, so the proposal, as I stated, was received by Forest Crest Athletic Club, which currently is operating a non-conforming use, has non-conforming structures and improvements on their site. However, this proposal is not site-specific. It will apply to all RS residential zoning districts in the city, and the proposal is to allow privately owned recreation facilities in these zones, given that specific criteria is met and a conditional use permit is obtained. So the revised proposal includes changes to the following codes. So our definitions code for the letter R, use code for recreation and transportation uses, street frontage and parking lot perimeter landscape code, perimeter landscaping on interior lot lines, location for parking, specific standards for signage, and then staff is proposing a new section in our residential zoning code for criteria for private recreation facilities. All All right. So back in October, determination of non-significance was issued on this proposal, and no agency or public comments were received on the environmental checklist. Staff sent the Department of Commerce the proposal and did not receive any comments within the 60-day review period. So public comment, and we went over this at the first public hearing, but we received 29 written comments, 13 signatures in advance of that public hearing. That was December 11th, and all comments were in favor of the text amendment and supported Forest Crest Athletic Club in updating their facilities. 0 comments have been received between December 11th and January 3rd when we wrote the staff report. All right, comprehensive plan, zoning and land uses, just high level. We looked at the land use element, the recreation element, housing, and economic development. And these are the key takeaways that related to the proposal. So the city should support a diverse and robust recreation program and opportunities. We need these to support growing population and demand in Mountlake Terrace. The urban low residential land use classification and the RS zoning district is primarily for single-family households. Complementary uses are allowed in these zones, but the code does not specifically define complementary uses. The city is required to provide housing for population growth. Business attraction and retainment is important for economic development, and development should be compatible with surrounding land uses. So when looking at a text amendment, as I stated earlier, the main criteria is to make sure that the proposal is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So staff has worked with the applicant to come up with a revised text amendment. We met with the applicant December 20th of last year and reached a consensus on most areas of concern. The only item where we didn't reach consensus was on locating within 500 feet of an arterial. Our city engineer originally recommended that private rec facilities be located on an arterial. The applicant did a follow-up meeting with the city engineer specifically to discuss this item, and the city engineer agreed to the original proposal as long as the requirement for a minimum lot size of 1.5 acres remains in place, and each applicant will be required to provide a traffic impact analysis. And so then staff continued to work with the applicant over email beginning of this year and has finalized a draft ordinance or a revised text amendment. So I'll go through each element that has been revised and what our final proposal is. So the definition section adds definitions for private and public recreation facilities, which helps distinguish, so no change there throughout the process. To our development standards for uses, recreation, and transportation, the change would allow private recreation facilities in all of our RS zones as a conditional use, and they must be located within 500 feet of an arterial, a collector, minor, or principal arterial, as we have designated in our transportation master plan. 19-130-210 is our landscaping code. This would add private recreation facilities to our suggested street frontage landscaping planter width, which is consistent with code language for public recreation facilities in our single household zones. Another landscaping code change would require that private recreation facilities provide a type 5 planting strip of 10 feet in width on interior lot lines when adjacent to RS zones, and a type 3 planter strip, also 10 feet in width on interior lot lines when adjacent to rec zones. And to remind you, type 5 is solid screening, and type 3 is a visual buffer. 19-125-20 is our parking code. And so for location, we're requiring private recreation facilities in RS zones to locate parking on the same lot as the buildings or facilities it will serve, and parking on public streets cannot count towards the parking requirements. 19-135-60 is our sign regulations. This will allow wall signs for private recreation facilities that are either 24 square feet or 10% of surface area wall, whichever is greater. The maximum sign area is 50 square feet, and the max number of signs per wall will be 1. 1930-75 is a new section that staff is adding to help us mitigate impacts to single household residences. So hours of operation for outdoor activities will be restricted to 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. And outdoor lighting for recreation facilities should be turned off when they are not operating. So same hours, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Light fixture heights maximum should be determined based on the specific recreational use and addressed through the conditional use permit process. So we have that there as a reminder that that's something that should be considered when reviewing each specific proposal. All lights provided should be shielded and direct light away from adjacent properties in accordance with our code that already talks about shielding and not letting light trespass onto other properties. Continuing this section, fences must comply with our existing fencing code, and then we added here that the first 12 feet in height, so from the ground up 12 feet of fencing, should be site obscuring, like a chain link fence with slats, mesh, or solid wood fencing would be allowed. A traffic impact analysis is going to be required every time a private recreation facility is proposed in a single household residential zone as part of that conditional use permit review. A minimum of 1 off-street loading and unloading space should be provided or is required to be provided, subject to the dimensions and requirements in our parking code currently. Continuing on with this new section, so on interior and through lots, the required side yards may be used for off-street parking areas. On corner lots, the rear yard may be used. The required front yard may not be used for off-street parking. This is consistent with what we allow for churches and private clubs. All structures shall be set back 20 feet from property lines, also consistent with what we allow for those uses in residential zones. Buildings associated with private recreation facilities shall not exceed 35 feet in height, and height is defined in Chapter 1915. The minimum lot area required to locate a private recreation facility is 1.5 acres. The maximum lot size to locate a private rec facility in a residential zone is 3 acres. And then last slide, continuing this section, for private recreation facility uses in the RS zones, the maximum lot coverage is going to be 45% of the lot area. For RST zones, the maximum lot coverage will be what's required in that zone per the code, which is 60%. And then lastly, private recreation facility uses will have a maximum impervious surface coverage allowed 75%. So staff recommendation. Staff recommends that Planning Commission recommend approval to City Council based on the following conclusions of law. So first, private recreation facilities may be a compatible use in RS zones if the criteria for approval adequately mitigates adverse impacts to adjacent properties. And as revised, staff believes that the criteria to approve private recreation facilities in RS zones better addresses compatibility and with adjacent and surrounding land uses. Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions or.
Does anybody have questions for staff? Yeah, go ahead.
Just curious, how did we land on the 7 to 10 hours for operation?
7 to 10. So we spoke with our parks director to see generally what we allow in public parks and what they're seeing kind of the demand for, and also what hours, as people living in residential areas, kind of what we think is a reasonable time span for that. So that's how we came up with that. Open to your thoughts or suggestions.
I kind of have a follow-up on that. We've recently had people come in and, make public comment about lighting issues in, other locations within the city. And, I think there is some question about, is 10 o'clock a little too late at night? If the 10 o'clock or the 7 to 10 hours exists wholly within this code and it's changed somewhere down the line in another part of the code, this still stands kind of as an outlier separate, or would the times be linked? So it's just across the board, public, private facility, doesn't matter. If if the city says, hey, the hours are only going to be until this late, it can be applied to all the different sections of the code?
So this proposal for this code section will be specific to private recreation facilities approved through conditional use permits in RS zones. I don't know if that answers your question.
I guess part of the question then is one, if it's a conditional permit, and the city ends up, changing how it approaches it everywhere else, does that mean that we would have to take separate steps to change it here too, or is it not even changing?
I think we would have to take separate steps to change. We would have to change the code that we're adopting right now if we wanted it to change for this type of use in this zone.
So I was just going to add, currently our noise ordinance goes from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're concerned about that, what we could also do is just cite back to our existing noise ordinance. So if that changes, then it would change in this particular case. But that's how, in part, like Sarah said, what is typical hours for recreational uses, that is this in most cases, and this is also what we currently have for noise in the city.
Mm-hmm.
And I would add too that in the summer, 10 p.m. could still be daylight, or just barely. And so how do we kind of address different seasons?
Yeah, it is a seasonal issue, especially since, if it's still daylight or dusk, sound carries differently than when it's actually dark. And, having seen firsthand, kind of the nuisance that lighting on until 10 o'clock can provide, given, certain situations. I'm surprised it took as long as it did for certain citizens to come in and, finally, speak up. So I foresee it being, maybe something that's going to be on the table in the future to be, looked at change, a combination of the lighting and the noise. So I was just kind of, if that does come to pass, can it be done all at once, or is it going to, separate every part of the code, has to be its own separate thing and, it ends up increasing the workload?
Yeah, it doesn't. And if you want to, when you guys make a motion, you can just have us cite back to, where our noise, I can't recall what chapter that's in, but we can cite that section, and then it would change if that code section changed.
Could we just, in terms of going down the line, we make a motion, could that be just considered a technical correction, or would we have to call that out specifically?
I would call it out in your motion that you want it to be cited back to our existing hours under our noise provisions in our text. And then we can if that's approved by the planning commission, then we can change that as part of our draft ordinance that goes to city council. And then we would just cite that in 1930-07-5, whatever that citation is.
Gotcha. And that could be the technical correction?
Yep.
You could- Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and in noise ordinances, a lot of times they'll have a definition of daytime hours and nighttime hours, or sometimes daytime, evening, and night hours. And so that's actually lives in like the definition, could actually live in the definition section at some point. So then other things based on that can refer back to that.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions for staff?
I have a few. If it's all right.
Yeah.
So I see that you're proposing a 45% lot coverage and some differences in the fence. These seem to be different than what we currently have in the code, which if I remember right is 40% lot coverage. We don't have like an impervious surface ratio, but that is something we might wind up looking at. I'm curious, A, sort of, why they're different, and B, if there are any other differences. I know we were talking about height limitations before, and then C, it seems like the fence, there might be a conflict because I think we have like a 4-foot high minimum, 20 feet from the right of way, but it could potentially, if you're on an interior lot line, I'm curious if there's a conflict between some of these like dimensional requirements.
So for the fence, our fence code has for like recreation or sports uses, I think a 50-foot maximum. So depending on what the sport is, that might be appropriate or that might be way too tall. So we would kind of defer to, during the conditional use process, reviewing that depending on what the sport is. And then the making it site obscuring is kind of unique. That's not part of the fence code for a residential fence or a sport fence, so we added that in to try to mitigate the impacts. So the requirements for fences, not exceeding 4 feet within the right of way would still exist and still apply to this type of use. So these are additional requirements for this special type of use. This doesn't conflict, I would say, with our existing fence code. It just adds to it. In terms of the lot coverage, we did go 5% more than what we currently allow. We felt like that was a reasonable given that recreational uses are more intense and would need more space than residential dwelling. And we felt like it didn't exceed it so much that it was going to impact residences. So we felt that was somewhere we could compromise. And then impervious surface, that was your other one.
Yes.
Yeah, so we don't have that widely throughout our code. We do have it in one of our special district residential zones at 50%, but staff looked at shoreline, which had a hard surface requirement that kind of ranged up to 75%. And we thought that with the legislation that was just passed, that our residential zones are going to become more dense in the future. And so it's actually more comparable to look at shoreline's slightly denser residential zones, the ones that allow duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes. And so when comparing those, 75% was right in the ballpark of what shoreline allows for that type of land use. And so that's how we came up with an impervious surface. And we felt it was important to have something there because with recreational uses, you might, see more impervious surface than with a residential use. So we wanted to have something, but something that was fair and within the ballpark of what other cities are doing.
Okay. I think we, as we're going, this is a little bit beyond the scope of the public hearing, but I think I'd imagine us revisiting these values at some point during the comp plan update for the R zones as well. And so as we do that, I don't know if we want to make a note or something to like revisit these as we do that, because I could see then, like if we go to 50% lot coverage or something, then that might wind up leaving this actually being less intense. And like in my mind, I think it's good to like, we don't want to make things very complicated by making things a little bit different here or there. So if it was possible to, I don't know what you all think, but if, we have it, a bit more aligned with the residential zone current lot coverage, I think that makes sense. Like, I understand that it's a little bit more intense, but then like, I'm not sure how we arrived at 45%. Like, why is it 45% instead of 50% or 30% or the current percent we have?
Well, when we met with the applicant, we asked them, what are you re-proposing for Planning Commission to consider? And staff didn't have any strong objection to their proposal of 45%. And so that's why we are before you with, their revised proposal based on our discussions.
Okay. If we weren't in the middle of a comprehensive planning process right now, I would probably ask it to be 40%, but because we're probably going to revisit these numbers in the future, I think, it's better for just kind of as a neatness thing for everything to sort of be aligned, if possible. Because like, regardless of what the use is, we've probably picked 40% for some kind of reason. And the more justification we can have for those reasons, I feel like the stronger we understand like why a number is a number. But I guess long story short, I'd probably be okay with 45% with the caveat that we revisit it during the comprehensive plan process, just to make sure that it's still generally kind of aligned with the residential, whatever number we have at the end of that. And then as far as the fence thing, did I hear you that we're looking, it almost sounds like there's, as part of the conditional use permit process, like if there is a conflict between like what our zoning code requires for residential and what this conditional use permit requires for the actual facility in question, that the hearing examiner would have leeway to work that conflict out?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, I mean, all cases, there has to be a clear view triangle for traffic and such. So higher fence heights are just trying to keep in step with, depending on what the use is. If it's a racket sport or soccer or whatever, that, realistically, you're having a higher fence height than we would in a for a single family home. So, but in all cases, yeah, impacts to traffic and sight distance are always going to take precedence over locating higher fences. So that'd be addressed.
Okay.
And I just wanted to make the citation for noise, if you guys choose, is 8.20.010 for noise in our code.
Okay. I'm sure someone will probably say that. The other question I had, and let me make sure that was the only other question. The traffic engineer originally recommended that the facility be directly on an arterial, and this is 500 feet back from the arterial. Did the traffic engineering department have any comments on this?
They felt that the likelihood that so many of these would be able to be built based on our criteria and the market, that it would be kind of unlikely that enough of them would be built to create the traffic impact issues that they were originally concerned with. And so that was why they kind of stressed having a minimum 1.5 lot size to try to help kind of curb maybe how many of these uses we would see, as well as requiring a traffic impact analysis, so each site could specifically review the conditions that currently exist and make sure that it would never be cited to create, more of a problem or a problem depending on the site specific. And so felt like the benefit of passing this or the negatives didn't weigh as much as what the city would get from allowing this to pass. And yeah.
Okay. And so what are the consequences of if they do a traffic study and it's found to have, I guess then what is a substantial impact? And then B, if it is found to have a substantial impact, what happens then?
For anywhere that it's proposed, or?
Yeah, if they file this conditional use permit and it's found to like raise the traffic by either like beyond the threshold of what a road was expected to carry, or yeah.
So that would go into the staff report for the hearing examiner to kind of consider in combination with all other elements of the proposal and impacts. And then planning commission, of course, to consider and make a recommendation.
Would we be doing that with a hearing process?
Actually, you'd be doing it through the SEPA process. So transportation, traffic is one of the criteria in SEPA. So if anything cannot be mitigated through any type of means that we find is a mitigated determination of non-significance or it's non-significant, and it rises to a significant factor, then an environmental impact statement would be required. So that would be that threshold that we're looking at when we're doing environmental analysis for all types of things, land use, critical areas, traffic, those type of things. So there's several steps in a process where we're determining that either impacts can be mitigated, or is there some impact that rises to the level where it just can't be mitigated. And in that case, then we're looking at issues with approving something. And that does happen in different scenarios where we have to deny a permit or something like that. It doesn't happen often, but that's why we set criteria and go through these review processes.
Okay, good. I don't remember if we've had language in here that specifically describes that. I'm sure it alludes to the process elsewhere in the code. I know in other facilities like this we have in town, they're often, like the rec pavilion is a good example. It's sort of not really on an arterial, but it generates a lot of traffic in that neighborhood. And there have been, complaints that have been filed that the eventual determination of why we don't need traffic calming on these streets was because of the positioning of that facility that was generating all the traffic. So it was reasonably expected that the facility, like the traffic demand was not caused by cut-through traffic or whatever in our traffic calming program, like it was just kind of there. And so it created a traffic impact. I think it would be good to include some language about minimizing traffic impacts through a coordinated traffic calming program in instances where we're not directly on the arterial. I don't know if that's part of the normal SEPA review process, but I know, a lot of our development that's happened in the past. I guess the Brighton School is another example where it's kind of not really on an arterial, but it's generating a lot of traffic on these streets and has caused some complaints. But tying SEPA review directly to the design of traffic calming on places where these are not directly in an arterial, I think would also be an important thing to consider.
So can you elaborate for staff what you consider traffic calming?
Sure. So things like modal filters so that, people aren't just speeding through the grid to get to a particular place. Speed calming through, chicanes or bumps or something. Basically something where the traffic is not necessarily, the traffic impacts, like if it's in a neighborhood that has, you know, like a lot of, like if you're seeing a lot of sort of more widespread traffic impacts, like you're trying to control it down to a particular pre-planned route without, and where that route is then speed controlled and things like that, and has pedestrian improvements and things to slow down the cars so they're not going 40 miles an hour down like a no lane road with no sidewalks.
Okay, I would say, in the city engineers here, but I would say it depends on what the impacts are shown for, in a traffic analysis. For instance, the concern that we hear for Brighton School or the Pavilion is the amount of traffic, not that people are necessarily speeding. So then you have impacts with cars backing up into an intersection or those type of things. So the traffic impact analysis is basically reviewed by a professional engineer to decipher what are the potential impacts, because it's not necessarily, and Rich, you can correct me about the speed bump issue. I don't think any traffic engineer that I know of wants a speed bump on a city street, but that would be something for him to weigh in on. But it depends on the impacts, and that's why you have to do the study. So it's not always just like, oh, people can race down 58th, they can race down 56th, they can race down any street. So what is the impact? That's what we're trying to get at, right? Versus just like, oh, all impacts are kind of built the same. So I would say, I think that the traffic impact analysis is that mechanism that we typically use to decipher what those impacts are and trying to address them, whether they're speeding cars or the amount of traffic we're trying to put through. Do we need a light at an intersection or a four-way stop, or those other things that a professional engineer would be able to say, in order to mitigate these impacts, this is what we need to do in this situation. So,
Do those account for pedestrian and cyclist traffic as well, or is that primarily like a level of service type thing where you're looking at overall traffic counts?
yeah, I would say there's issues with, in all things that we do, with what's considered a nexus under land use law. So there may need to be a sidewalk, or there may need to be, hey, a want for a sidewalk in certain locations, but you can't condition one development to take care of a deficiency per se if the impact is not associated with that development. So we need to be very careful in what we're assessing, because that's against the law. So if the nexus is created from that land use, then we can condition something, but it has to be created from that thing, not just like, hey, we've got a lot of kids walking down this street already, and somebody happens to come in with the development, we're going to make them improve their frontage and a bunch of other frontage. We can't do that, right? So do we make them, if there's an actual nexus, can we do that? Yes, but we have to be careful with, kind of what we do. Or, hey, wouldn't bike lanes be nice here?
Yeah. And just to clarify, the actual nexus is if they're making it worse, or if they're causing it, or is it just if they're causing it?
If there's direct impacts where they're causing a condition, right? If I'm causing something because I'm proposing something, then that's a direct correlation. Yep.
Okay. So in terms of ensuring that we look at these kind of, not just the overall numbers of traffic, but also
Sure.
the character of the traffic, where it goes, and not just car traffic, but also people traffic. How are we addressing that in this code?
Well, the beauty is that you'll have that conversation right after this one for our new engineering standards, and you can ask the city engineer that exact question of making sure what's addressed in those studies. And those should be applicable across the board of how we're addressing impacts to different development, not just to this particular one or ones that will be private recreational facilities, but all things that we do that require this and what's involved in that. So I think that's a great question to ask in our next public hearing.
Okay, if we're voting on this tonight and we have language recommendations, is that something we could put in as like a statement in this code amendment here, that we don't necessarily have to define what it is or even necessarily what the threshold is because it's defined elsewhere in the code, but just kind of double down and make reference to it here?
You can, but then I think we're getting back to what we talked about previously with like noise or other things that we're putting separate regulations to address the same thing in different spots. I would say if there's a concern about what's in that analysis, that we address it as part of that analysis is the best way.
Okay.
And then that way it's applicable in different situations.
All right, so we can defer that to the next public hearing then. It sounds like is where the appropriate place for that to live is.
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
So I had questions on the traffic study part too, so thank you for, for handling that. I will kind of circle back though to your, actually I wanted to say too, we've talked about traffic calming in the past, and I know one of the issues is the fire department has concerns about certain types of traffic calming that's going to slow their ability to get to an emergency. Seconds means lives. So, when we think of like even things, like, bumps or, traffic circles and narrow streets, it doesn't, the fire department frowns upon that quite a bit. So that was the answer that we got in the past when this issue comes up, but it's, it's still a problem. But kind of getting back to your comment on lot area coverage and consistency is, I guess, for you specifically, but for everybody, is that something that you would want to see tied to existing code? So if it changes all at once, as opposed to being kind of orphan standalone where it can be forgotten about or not treated the same as we're treating everything else? Was that kind of what you were hoping to see?
Yeah, the I don't know, innate computer programmer in me sort of wants to see the number of excess variables reduced and condensed down to like it's nice if everything sort of lines up, I think, is if I understand what you're asking.
Yeah.
It seems to me we're carving out numbers for recreational facilities in single-family zoning. So this is kind of a specific number to this topic that I don't think we could tie back to anything else. I don't see anything else in the code that would be relevant to maintain.
Well, with the lighting and the noise, it's tied back to the general code as it applies to other, like, public recreation facilities as well. So if in the future, like, if it changes there, it would, depending on how the motion goes, and passes, it would change here as well. Is that something that we would want to see consistency then, the lot coverage for public recreation facilities to be tied to that number as well? Or have it be two separate, we're treating public facilities and private facilities different, or in the end of the day, they're both recreation facilities and they should be treated equally?
Yeah, we're just addressing, right now, like Sarah said, how we came up with it is 40% for single-family residential. In staff's mind, it stands to reason that we're talking about a little bit more intense use here. Other codes allow a little bit higher threshold. We won't address it during comp plan, but we will address it during development regulations right after comp plan, where we're getting into the nitty gritty of the zoning code. And I think part of our reasoning to increase that, as well as we're going to be required to have a duplex on every lot in the city per new legislation, 2 accessory dwelling units in addition to that, and to upzone for population. So the way we've done things in the past of 35, 40% lot coverage is not going to work in the new world, let's just say. In the new city, setbacks are going to change, lot coverages are going to change, because we are mandated by state law to provide increased density and more housing. And so even for residential use, that means our lot coverages are going to change, let alone higher intensity uses where we're talking more of a commercial type use, or recreational or industrial or other things. So it's just going to become part of our new vocabulary. What that exactly looks like, we haven't figured that out, but we came up with a number that worked for the applicant and we thought was reasonable as staff. I think we definitely will probably look at it again just when we have a better idea of what we're gonna have to land on for increased densities and residential uses within the next little bit after we get the comp plan done this year and start working on zoning. So that's kind of where we're at.
And I think this is a problem with numbers we find in codes where it's like, why is it 40%? Someone decided, 50 years ago that it sounded like a good number. It's like, I would expect there to be some kind of environmental reason for why we chose that number. And if we don't have that information, then who is to say if 40 or 45% is better? Why not even just change the baseline number to 45% in residential zones? But if we knew why 40% was chosen, we could have more of a conversation about, is 45% a reasonable number to expect for this? And so as we're moving forward, I'd like to see sort of, we've been pretty good about when I've seen a number and I ask questions, where did it come from? A lot of times people have answers, but I think this might not be one where we have an answer. Is that correct?
I would say how people came up with 40% previously is that we had pretty standardized setbacks, 5-yard side yard setbacks. We had bigger front yards and we had larger rear yards when we were developing these single family lots previously. So 40% allowed somebody to build a structure on there, to build a garage, an outbuilding, et cetera, and still have, at the time, what was considered adequate open space. So that's where you saw those 35%, 40% thresholds. That's no longer going to be the case. And so that's kind of where people landed on that previously. And that, light, air, those things that are kind of basic planning principles, that's where we landed. What staff is trying to say is we know that that's going to go up. We don't know what that looks like until we get more defined zones and densities. But to think that we're going to have a 15 or 20 foot front yard setback with 5 foot side yard setbacks and a 15 or 20 foot rear yard setback is not going to be the reality moving forward in a little over a year here, because there's no way we can put the amount of density on these lots and still have those lot coverages. 45% sounded reasonable. It works for these type of uses. That's why we kind of landed on that. So, I mean, it's not exact science, but I would say I don't know what exact science is right now for this. So.
And we'll have exact science in about a year or so, or as exact as it can get for this kind of.
Yeah, I wouldn't say exact science. I would say, kind of best planning that we can, taking a look at all the factors. So.
Okay, well, this is why, I think it's messy, and I hope we clean it up, but, I don't really see a reason why 45, it's not that much higher. It's a larger lot. They've already got other setbacks. I don't see a reason why, we shouldn't, but, it's also, a sign that, this number is, maybe should be based on something a bit more substantial, then we just kind of, it's the number. So,
Yeah, I think it's important to remember too, that as we talk about having to increase the density, for the residential lots per state law, that's a like use for like use next to each other, whereas a recreation facility is a completely different type of use with a different type of intensity and a different type of impact. And in some cases, maybe that does warrant, extra buffering and not as dense. So, where houses these days are literally stacked up on top of each other, maybe we don't want to see that with, any type of large facility, stacked right up on top of those, those homes as well.
yeah, and we're keeping the height limit consistent, and there is greater setback than you would have in a typical RS zone. Like, it's not a 5-foot setback, it's a 10-foot setback with visual barrier.
So it sounds like the city's going to be looking at this during the development regulation period anyway, where, things can be tweaked or changed. So it doesn't necessarily have to be included or called out for this specific code right now, or for the motion that is made if there is that concern about the numbers. Or does the planning commission feel that that question should be answered tonight, or, a different number put down there?
We're only talking about how many lots this would even apply to. I think we're talking about less than a dozen lots in the city.
Yeah, I think between the time we approve this and the time that we vote to, recommend it, and the time that we change this number is short enough that it'll probably be a minimal impact to the overall development of the city.
Okay. I just need to know what I have to write on this.
Yeah.
On this furious chicken scratch I'm putting down here to, when we move forward. Did you have any other questions?
Just to, this now puts more onus on the traffic engineering portion of our planning code, because we're not directly addressing it here. So, but that is something that I think is, needs to be clearly and coherently addressed whenever one of these has an impact. So.
Yeah. I hear the voice of Vic and Miguel in my head, because they would always bring up service levels. So.
Yeah, it's not just for cars, but for people, and for bicycles, and for buses, and for emergency vehicles.
Did anybody else have any questions for staff? All right. And I guess since I should just ask this right now to make it easy, does the commission feel comfortable if a motion, were to be made to have the inclusion to tie it into the lighting, time, operations, and noise ordinance standards? Okay, so sounds like we're fine with including that in any potential motion, but not the lot coverage part, because that will be addressed fairly soon with development. Okay, all right, just trying to keep my ducks in a row here. All right, so since we don't have any other questions for staff from the Planning Commission, it looks like at this point we need to reopen the public hearing. So would anybody like to make a motion to reopen the public hearing?
Motion to reopen the public hearing.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to reopen the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. The public hearing is now reopened. And so it looks like at this point, the applicant would present the agenda item. And just a reminder, because this is your presentation, the 3-minute time limit doesn't apply to this.
I only need 3 minutes to say.
Okay.
Tom Anderson with Forest Crest Athletic Club, 4809 238th Street, Southwest, Mountlake Terrace. I just wanted to thank the commission for considering our proposal, particularly the last meeting. I think you guys had a lot of questions, and I think it was smart for us to extend the meeting to allow us to work with the staff, Sarah and Christy and Rich, and I think we came to some pretty good compromises, and that everybody was happy with. And so I just want to thank you guys, all of you, for that. So I think it was extremely helpful, and I think we made really good progress. and we're looking forward to, a positive outcome. And we think Forest Crest is an asset to the community. And what we'll be able to do if we get this text amendment passed will be even better things, and I think some good infrastructure for the city as well. So thank you very much, and staff.
And then, as part of this, does commission have any questions for the applicant? All right, doesn't look like any. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
So the next part of this, we'll go ahead and open it up to, we still have part of the presentation. Go ahead.
Just real quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Lee Michaelis, Puget Sound Planning, 6100 219th Street Southwest, Suite 480, 98046. I just asked the commission that as you deliberate, think about the traffic. Commissioner Betcher has some great points, but that's all assuming that we're going to have a major impact. We can't get to that mitigation point until we identify the impacts. The impacts will be identified during that traffic impact study. So I think requiring the study, identifying the impacts, and then identifying the mitigation is the correct procedure. I just don't think that should be codified. You have enough tools already in your engineer standards, as well as SEPA, as what Chrissy brought up. Those are the tools that you could use during the review process to bring up those mitigation measures. That was it.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. So we'll now go ahead and open up for the general public comment. So is there anybody who signed up to speak tonight on this issue?
There is no one currently signed up to speak on this issue, and there is no one in the online audience.
Okay, I'm glad we can skip that part. All right, so wow, I got to skip a couple sections here since we got no one else to speak. So, was there any new written testimony that was submitted at all, or everything was previously submitted that we saw in our last meeting?
As per Sarah's presentation, there was no new testimony submitted between then and the 3rd, and no new testimony has been submitted up until this point.
Okay, good. All right, so hearing that, I'm looking for a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing.
I have a motion to close the public hearing. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. The public hearing is now closed. Bear with me one second here. I gotta go through my list here. All right, so at this point, barring any other further discussion from the Planning Commission, it sounds like we got all of our questions answered and all our concerns taken care of. I just want to double check one more time with our online commissioner as well. Commissioner Harrison, did you have any other additional questions, or are you good?
No additional questions.
Great, thank you. All right, so now I am, at this point, we would look for a motion. So I'm passing off the script here, and then the addition is, tell me if you can't read it, and I apologize for the handwriting.
All right. I move to recommend approval of the zoning text amendments for private recreational facilities with the addition to the existing city code to make the lighting time standard operations consistent with the noise ordinance, which is 8.20.010.
All right, I have a motion to approve the zoning text amendment for private recreational facilities, MTMC 19.15.190, 19.23, and 19.30, and 19.135.060. All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Hearing none, that motion carries. All right. So it looks like we are good on this then. So thank you very much, staff. Thank you very much, applicant. So. And I'll just check in real quick with Planning Commission. I know we have 2 other public hearings tonight. Would anybody like to take a break now or get through? If anybody needs a break, or if everyone's good, we can just move on to the next item. Yeah, so, okay.
Now there's a lot of
That's
weight
what
on
I
this.
figured. That's why I wanted to
This has
double
become
check.
a lot
All
more
right.
important here,
So
so.
we'll go ahead and take a 5-minute recess. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rich Meredith. I'm our city engineer. I was sitting in the audience, so I know you've queued up some questions for me already. And I've been looking up some stuff so I can respond quickly. Let's see. That is not the right. Cancel, share screen. Talking to myself. There. All right. I just thought I would run through the same PowerPoint that I've pretty much shown you the other meetings. We're here tonight to have our public comment period about our new engineering development manual and some of the code revisions that we're proposing in conjunction with that. This is our 5th meeting, the public hearing. The purpose of our whole exercise here for the engineering development manual is that we have a number of codes that are scattered in our comp plans and our codes, our development standards, and we're trying to get them all consolidated into one place. There's some new faces. I got to go through this. We want to get them into one place so it's easier and more efficient to update it. It's easier for developers and designers to find the information, and it kind of cuts down on conflicting standards, because if there's multiple sources, sometimes it's tough to keep them all in sync. So with that, we working with our partners over in Shoreline, they gave us their engineering development manual as a template that we've followed to update it with Mountlake Terrace standards. And then we've been going through the code to figure out what elements, design elements that were in the code make sense to put in the engineering development manual. Part of the reason it's better to have a separate engineering development manual instead of in the code is changes are a lot swifter and a lot easier to do. You don't have to go through as much effort to update a standard if it's in one document than you do if it's in the code. So what we are doing and what we've been doing for the last year is we've been bringing sections of the EDM as we develop them and shared them, got great feedback from it, and we're at the point now where we have a draft document, and so we're sharing that with you and the public. Here's the different sections that we've set up in there. The layout of the document is to try to walk somebody through the whole process. So it starts off with the permitting, some of the street design, the stormwater and sewer and water, all the utility elements, what you would do through construction and the closeout. Here's our current tentative schedule. I always say tentative because this is subject to change. But in December, we brought this full document for review. And at that time, I don't think you had the track changes version of the code revisions. So we sent that out after the December 11th meeting. And so depending on the feedback that we hear from tonight, and if we have any public comments on this, we will take that back and make any further revisions. Right now, we're tentatively scheduled to present this to the City Council at a study session on the 25th. And if that goes smoothly and there's not a lot of feedback about suggested changes, then hopefully we could have a public hearing and approval on February 1st. So that's kind of the best case scenario, but we are certainly ready and able to make changes and push these dates out a little further if we want to do, make sure we're addressing everybody's comments. So with that, some of the questions that we like to ask is the format understandable? You know, this is a large document and it can be complicated, and we're trying to make it as user-friendly as we can. So if there's any feedback on the format and how it's set up and laid out, we welcome those type of comments. Are there anything we're missing? This is our first draft. I'm expecting there's a lot of issues in there that either, if they're controversial, we've proposed to table those until the next version, because we're going to start version 2 as soon as we finish version 1. Part of the reason for that is if there's something that's going to drag this process out, we have a need to establish these standards now. We're getting more and more development inquiries and development happening. And so a lot of the changes that we're making are relevant now. And the longer we put it off, the less efficient it is for staff to try to review all these developments. We're getting some conflicting direction. It would be a better public service effort on our part if we can standardize and make our results more consistent for them. So we're trying to get our first draft out now, and then recognizing we're probably going to have to start updating it as soon as we're done. And then again, if there's any comments on the schedule, we're welcome to adjust the schedule as needed to make sure everybody is heard and everybody's questions are answered. So with that, I thought I would jump into, are there any questions first?
Anybody have any questions? Nope.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I have a question, Rich. Thank you so much. I can't imagine the undertaking this has been for you. You mentioned that it's going to be easier in the future to make changes. Can you just tell us a little bit about making changes to the EDM in the future, what that will look like? Because I assume it won't be the same sort of process.
So what I envision is that we are going to authorize the EDM in the code. So the authority for the EDM is established by the code. Within the EDM, we've listed out a few of the, we've listed out the standards, but we've listed out who is the authority that would need to, make any variances or deviations to some of these standards. Who's the final authority if there's a question. The thing about standards is they're not going to cover every situation. So we try to, pick a typical situation, something that's going to apply to the majority of them, but there are always, every single one's going to need some customization. Who makes the decision on where we can deviate, where we can, push the standards to the envelope. One thing I've always said about standards is that the standards today are not going to be the standards tomorrow. And so understanding all the assumptions and what it takes to set a standard, you set a standard, then you watch it in practice, and then you evaluate it to see, what could have been done better? Where was this good? Where wasn't it so good? And so it's constantly self-checking, and evaluating it, and then that's how our standards evolve and become better and better. So we want to make sure we have a process in place that we can set a standard, but then be able to continually update it to make it better. And so by vesting some of the authority to modify a standard in the EDM, a lot of these decisions could rest with my authority, or they could rest with the community development director, it could be the public works director. If it's in the code, then it goes through a whole process and needs to be approved by the council. And some of these technical details, probably get too far in the weeds for council level direction. So I guess that's kind of the long answer.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
So when is the next target update to this after we approve and send this, so we have an idea of kind of the timeline you're looking at?
Once this gets approved by council, and the tentative schedule, we're guessing the 1st of February, then I would say that we're going to try and come back annually. which would mean probably, I want to say in the fall, but I know that's budget time, and so that's not a good time to come back. So probably in about a year. Maybe the February timeframe gives us time to work out new details, and then we would start bringing it to the council and the planning commission earlier, but probably for adoption in the February, maybe March timeframe.
Sounds reasonable. Are you collecting feedback during this time, and would you be able to sort of give us periodic updates of kind of what you're hearing or what other people are hearing, or is that? It sounds like that process will kind of start in about 6 months or 8 months or so.
Well, what I envision is we'll have a website, a webpage dedicated to this, so that people can make it easier for them to find what they need and be able to download the EDM and any attachments that go along with it. And then my plan is to have a feedback form there, so that if people want to see changes to it, or if they find errors in it, there will be errors, here's an easy to find spot to make those kind of comments, and then we can address those as we develop the next version of it.
That's fantastic. I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
And just want to double check, Commissioner Harrison, did you have any questions at this time?
Oh, no questions at this time.
Okay, cool. All right.
All right. So I don't have a kind of a solid plan about what to talk about next, but what I wanted to do was address some of the comments that I heard earlier. And I think one of the things that would be helpful is to talk about the traffic analysis. So I'm going to zoom in on, this isn't right. Sorry, this is, I'm used to using Bluebeam, and Adobe doesn't work so well, so. Try that. All right, I think this is, so that's, sorry, that's still not right. All right. First, here we are. There's chapter 8. This is where we talk about what triggers a transportation impact analysis. I can make that bigger. So this is what's currently proposed, and this is certainly something that we can amend. But the current city code is actually requiring a traffic impact analysis if there's 10 or more new trips in the PM peak hour. That's a pretty low threshold. So trying to balance the smaller developers with the big developments, a traffic impact analysis will add, thousands of dollars to a development proposal. So we're trying to find that happy medium that would be a good measure about when you need one and when you don't. 20 or more PM peak hour trips is kind of a standard around some of the other local jurisdictions. So we were proposing to adopt that threshold. with the caveat that it's, there needs to be some discretion about what the peak hour use of what's the peak hour trips of the use. For example, I reviewed a traffic impact analysis one time for one of the mega churches. Now, on a regular weekday in the afternoon, they hardly generated any traffic, but Sunday morning, it was a mess. So we need to be able to reserve the right to still require a traffic impact analysis if the peak hour of the use is also at least 20 trips. And I think the determination on whether we're going to use the use or just our standard PM peak hour would fall upon our traffic engineer. So just looking through some of the criteria here, we're also looking at, depending on the size of the development, whether the scope of the traffic analysis is going to be more regional. If we get some large developments in here, they can have more of a regional aspect. We want to make sure we've got some language in here to make sure that that all gets included in the analysis. So this is in the EDM, and then we've got an Appendix E that gets into even more detail there. So these are the requirements and the guidelines of what we need them to include in one of their traffic impact analysis. Some of the basics, their level of service analysis is going to be consistent with the highway capacity manual. You know, the trip generation numbers will follow the ITE trip generation manual. You know, let me see, we want to have them work with our traffic engineer to determine the study area. Usually it includes the adjacent intersections, and depending on the access points, it could be further than that, and the size of it. We want them to make sure they include any capital projects in the area or any pipeline projects in their analysis. We want them to use recent data. One thing I've found in the past is if they use old traffic counts or they try to get credit for a land use that hasn't been, it's been vacant for years, so you can't really subtract out existing trips from the new ones if they haven't been using it at all anyway. There's information like that in here. We have them look at safety. We have them look at pedestrian facilities. We have them look at American with Disabilities Act criteria. Now that the PROAG has been official, we're going to make sure that we have incorporated the standards that are in the new PROAG. That's the Public Rights of Way accessibility guidelines. We have them do a bicycle facility analysis. So we want to make sure that our traffic impact analyses are multimodal. So they're going to be more than just cars. They're going to be more than just trucks. They're going to include all the pedestrian access and the bikes. I heard that question earlier. And again, here's the regional aspects depending on the size of it. Neighborhood impacts. I think our community development director mentioned that if the traffic impact analysis identifies deficiencies, that would be a SEPA condition to mitigate it. Absolutely right. That's how a lot of these deficiencies, if it's directly related to the development, would get addressed. When it comes to, I heard the question about the neighborhood traffic programs, and we have a neighborhood traffic program here, and our new traffic engineer is one of the regional experts in that, I have to say. So we have a lot of expertise in applying that. But it's a tool, so I think there was some discussion about whether we should put language about traffic calming in the code, but this engineering development manual is the appropriate place for it because in some cases neighborhood traffic is appropriate and sometimes there are better tools than just the neighborhood traffic program. So we're trying to not get as prescriptive as specifying that in the code. We want to leave it, to see what happens with the traffic plan and use our expertise to decide what's the best tool. Sometimes it's a implementation plan. It's not always, putting in everything you can think of at once. You're going to start with the least restrictive measures and then evaluate them, and if that's not as effective, then you have more tools in the toolbox to apply. Fire department is always consulted when we do traffic calming on local streets. And I know I've worked with the Seattle Fire Department a lot and the Shoreline Fire Department a lot and the Redmond Fire Department. Speed humps, while they are an impediment to their response time, they also recognize that they're a safety improvement, and sometimes the speed cushions are a better solution. So there are ways to apply calming and still accommodate the fire trucks. Neighborhood traffic circles, same thing. Whenever I put them in, we've always had the fire truck go test out the design before we ever build it in concrete or asphalt. So those are just some of the fundamentals that we follow when we do our traffic stuff. I don't remember if we covered this at the last meeting, but one of the new elements of the EDM is a street matrix. We applied the town center standards and created just the town center area for this first round. And basically what we've done is we've looked at the streets in the town center and decided where the curbs should be. Usually when there's a development, one of the first things that is asked is where's the curb going to end up, the ultimate curb. And you want to look at a street and take a holistic approach because you want to make sure that as each development populates and rebuilds the curb and sidewalk that they all tie together in the end. The code in the town center code in our code, is subject to interpretation in a couple areas, especially when it comes to 56th. We wanted to make sure that we looked at how we want these streets to ultimately function and to make it a little more clear so that it removes some of the ambiguity and the arguments out about how a street frontage should look. It still leaves the room in there for developers to decide in the town center area if it's going to be a landscape block or a storefront block, but at least this is going to make it more consistent. So we've included a number of the town center streets in here, and I think we put in some of the proposed streets also. And for the streets that aren't in town center, then we have our standard generic details that'll be in the standard plans. Let's see. There was also some talk about the noise ordinance. And I think we talked about this maybe a few meetings back, but the noise ordinance is one of those issues that I think might take a little more time to figure out. But our noise ordinance doesn't have a lot of restrictions in it. So, for example, there's not a lot of language in there about not working on the weekends or what hours you would work on the weekends and the holidays. And so I think that doing a survey among some of the adjacent municipalities, they've all got stricter language in that. And I think that as we get denser, and as we get more bigger population, I think making sure that we've got some good, clear language and times set up in our noise variance or our noise ordinance that's going to help us with enforcement if we do have a problem. So we want to be a little proactive on that, and that's something that will be included. Probably not a big change in this, but we want to set up the EDM so that it references what is being done in the code. A noise ordinance is something that would be in the code. It wouldn't be transferred into the EDM. So let's see. Another issue that I heard discussed earlier was lot coverage. And that is an excellent question, and I think we talked a little bit about that before also. There's language in the current code that talks about how much you can pave your front yard. And, you know, there's different reasons about why you would pave and not pave your front yard. There are some of these newer developments are senior homes. You know, so they're trying to build circular driveways for pickup and drop off, or some of the commercial developments want that's going to involve paving more of your front yard. Some places are trying to pave the front yards to park a motorhome there or extra vehicles. Maybe that's not quite how we want those front yards to look. So trying to find the appropriate number for lot coverage is going to be tricky, and we're going to have to put a little time into that too. So I don't know that we're going to necessarily have a lot of lot coverage numbers in here. We're going to try and be consistent with what we've said in the code. With that, I thought I would see if anybody had any questions or areas you want me to go over in the EDM.
I actually had a quick one, kind of circling back to one of your earlier topics when you were talking about, you know, that trip generation threshold, you know, the peak PM. Mm-hmm. And I was just curious, you know, there is a difference between, you know, if a development is, you know, on an arterial and it's generating, you know, 10 PM trips or 10, you know, 20 PM trips versus, you know, something that's, you know, kind of really set back on a side street, you know, where that is going to have much more impact. Is there, does the street type make a difference in terms of the trip generation threshold?
We did not, we didn't put the street classification in there as a criteria. So at this point, no, but we can certainly add that. I think if we, based on what we talked about with the tennis facility and the public recreation facilities, you know, maybe this is a place where we add another sentence or two in here to tie the trip generation into the roadway classification. And so if they are on a local street and not on an arterial, or if their access is off a local, then maybe that's where we keep the 10 vehicles per PM hour and then leave the 20 vehicles per PM peak hour for the arterials. I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah. Sorry, I had a question building on your question. So then there are like sort of a range of numbers you expect based on street classification of like number of vehicles per hour in that case, or per day, or whatever the classification is?
Well, there's the federal functional classification of a road that says if your road has volumes in this range, then it's a principal arterial or it's functioning as a minor or a collector. And the range is pretty big, so it's hard to define based on the class of the road other than if it's an arterial or it's not. You know, when it comes to principal arterials, I think the 220th is our only principal arterial. You know, we're a small community here, so we're not going to have a lot of the different miles of roadways like that. So I think just having the threshold be local street and arterial street should probably be enough.
Okay, and local street tops out at, I don't remember how many vehicles per hour. Is it like 300 or 400 or something like that?
Yeah, well,
day.
that it's, you can't really put a number on it. I mean, if you look at your general street system, you're going to have certain percentages of the different classes of streets. And if you happen to have 1,000 cars on a collector arterial, that's fine. But you may have a local street that doesn't have any nearby collector arterials. It could carry that much also. So this is actually a great question, and it's an exercise we're going to go through with the Transportation Master Plan update. Some of the questions that I've heard are something that we'll be covering in there, and that's going to be like the bike modal level of service, multimodal level of service, are all going to be addressed with the new Transportation Master Plan. And as part of that, we're developing models for the city, and we're going to evaluate the classifications of the roadways to see if it makes any sense to change some of them. Because there's a few neighborhoods that are classified all local streets, but they really should have some type of a collector aspect of one of the roadways that reaches into these neighborhoods. So this hasn't been looked at in this level of detail in a number of years, and so we're really excited that we've got a great team on board to take a look at those and help give us some recommendations. They're also going to be looking at what we should set the appropriate level of service for both vehicles, peds, and bikes that we'll adopt into our code when we're all said and done.
So our current plan of traffic design is that we sort of look at where the cars go and size the streets based on what the cars are currently doing. Is that correct?
The old school would do that, but these days, as we want to incorporate more peds and bikes, it's not everything is going to be so auto-centric. I'm a traffic engineer for 40 years, and I've come to realize that in some places, congestion can actually be good because it slows the cars down. It makes it easier for pedestrians to cross. Road diets. I have my eye on a couple of roads for a road diet just to help improve safety and ped access. And, it's just taking a kind of a fresh look at a lot of our current street operations and see what makes sense. You see other jurisdictions lowering all the speed limits on their streets. Now, I don't know if that's the right answer or not. I think there's some other things that we can do first, but from what I've found is that if you can focus traffic to on the arterials, and then you can do more neighborhood traffic calming on the local streets, you can have a better overall outcome. But it's the first steps are to get our TMP in place and our citywide traffic models built up again, and then start looking at how we can fine tune them. We had a great project in Shoreline where we did neighborhood traffic plans for all the different communities and let the neighbors kind of help drive what the plan looked like and the priorities. That was such a great tool and a great effort. I would love to replicate that up here.
I would also like to see that. I think it's good. I'm glad to hear you say that we're putting some intentionality into our street design rather than just reacting to what we find the traffic counts coming up. And I think maybe, sort of tied back to Chair Bautista's question about do we have, if we do have like a facility that opens on a classification of street, like the volume isn't necessarily tied to the classification of street, it sounds like, but it would be part of the traffic impact analysis in order to see like what that volume of traffic is, automobile traffic is on that street. And it wouldn't necessarily break the project if it was adding a lot of cars, but it would depend a lot on how the cars are behaving, sort of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, we want to manage the traffic, not necessarily push a problem somewhere else. And, you know, we want to look at what's the state of the art and what's the best practice for how to handle some of these. We are going to get denser. I mean, that's a given with some of the legislative decisions. And so we want to be prepared to handle that as it comes to us, not having to react to it.
Okay. And if we have, you know, we don't really have a range for what a street, neighborhood street is versus an arterial and collector, but is that something you think would be helpful to add, or is that something you think would maybe tie us a little bit too much?
Well, we'll have characteristics of a local street and characteristics of the different arterials. That should be a part of our transportation master plan. And we'll take those characteristics and look at how each one of these streets is operating to see if it makes sense to change the classification. Beyond that, I don't know that we would put anything necessarily in this document or in the code, because it would live, that's the type of information that would live in the master plan.
Okay. Great. And then it looked like you had some other, this is my last question, sorry everyone. You had some impacts on, when you're doing the traffic impact study, you also have pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure included in that. And that is, when I was sort of skimming through, it looked like it was mostly the presence of facilities? Or is there also, not to let perfect be the enemy of the good here, I think they should go through, but like as we're looking forward in the future through our master planning process, the things like pedestrian level service and bicycle level of comfort and stuff that isn't in our code yet, but might be at some point in the future, we would enhance that section with those in that case.
That's correct. We've already told our consultant that these are measures that we want to have addressed in the transportation master plan, this new one. And as we develop these different goals in that, then we would incorporate the measures to reach those goals in our EDM and some of the future additions.
Okay, great.
All right, looks like Commissioner Harrison has his hand raised.
Thank you, and thank you, Rich. So I had a bit of another question regarding the impact analysis. Is there any sort of measurement of trips that happens with the city outside of a new development? So the thing I'm sort of thinking of, is there any sort of measurement of, like, say, you know, non-arterial streets use, if you know, but where there isn't a new development or a new building being built, just to sort of get an understanding of if, you know, for whatever reason people are using side streets more, or they're getting more use, or, you know, there might be a need for changing the speed limits, or maybe even adding, you know, speed bumps or speed cushions to some of those side streets, because for whatever reason people might be using those side streets rather than our main arterials.
So with a new development, if we have kind of a history or a record of complaints about that type of behavior, then that's something that we would take into account when they're doing their traffic analysis, make sure that's addressed. If it's an existing development, then I would say that this is something that our traffic engineer is looking to tackle citywide. We are collecting new traffic counts and building up our new traffic count program so that we can identify these type of hotspots, both through complaints and through data. You know, a lot of our work is going to be data driven, just so that we can make sure that we're addressing the worst cases first. But we are hoping to kind of put together kind of an understanding of which streets are a chronic problem, and which ones, it gets back to the neighborhood traffic planning effort that I talked about earlier. that's kind of a tool that I see us eventually going to develop plans for each one of the neighborhoods. And just to describe how that worked before, is we set up in each neighborhood kind of a focus group of residents and let them kind of identify what the problems are. Because as the city engineers, we're not going to be out there 24/7 like a resident will. And so I think there's a lot of value in what the people who actually live in the neighborhood have to say about what's going on in their street. And then using that type of information, then we can go out and do some data collection to help support what they're seeing. And, through some education efforts, we can help try to figure out what's the best solution out there. So I don't know if I'm quite hitting what you're saying, but I have kind of a two-prong approach. One is to identify what roads are a problem, and then try to figure out how I can get to a solution, be it through a development or through some other programs or CIP projects.
So maybe getting it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think you answered my question. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry, Commissioner Harrison, I jumped the gun. Your question was very good. How does one? What sources of complaints do you look at?
Well, we get emails and social media is out there. So, I try to use as many different sources as I can. So between emails and social media, we'll have, with some of our projects, we have open houses, and traffic issues always come up at our open houses. As we do more work on developing 57th and Town Center, we anticipate having some open house charrettes to help guide how that street ultimately looks. That should be happening this year. The complaints come from a number of areas, or the comments. I don't want to call them complaints because sometimes they're positive. We collect them everywhere we can and just try to get an understanding of where the problem roads are.
Great. And it sounds like you're looking to maybe not in this edition of the document, but at some future, you're looking to create actually some neighborhood groups where you're having people comment on traffic issues in their neighborhood. Did I hear that correctly?
Well, that's one of Rich's wishes. That's on my wish list. There's a few other priorities we're trying to get up and running first, and then, but that's definitely something that's on our hopeful work plan in the next year or two.
That's good. I'm unaware if any of you are all aware of like city-sponsored neighborhood groups that look like this outside of maybe the neighborhood park improvement subcommittee that have like focus on a specific park individually, but like I think this might be like a new thing for Mountlake Terrace, and I think it could be one of those community building things. I don't know. I think I'd like to hear more about that as you work through it. So
certainly, I know one thing that one of the real positive benefits from doing that, having a plan to pull off the shelf whenever a funding opportunity comes up is great, because that's the first thing they ask, is this part of an adopted plan somewhere? So that was always really helpful. But I also know that I used to get a lot of phone calls from residents about traffic problems. And I found that after you form these groups and you educate the smaller group in the neighborhood about traffic control devices and the pros and cons, there's always pros and cons, people seem to be more comfortable talking to some of their neighbors than the city sometimes, because they think the city won't listen to them. I don't know where they get that idea, but it just seemed that the neighborhood people that we educated would spread the word, and the number of calls that we would get would go down. And then these days with social media and the internet, you can find out a lot of information about different types of traffic control. So, I think that making sure we have a robust traffic information page on our website and maybe links to some of the other people who have the same information on their city websites. It's just information sharing, I think, can go a long way.
Great.
Anybody else have any questions at this point? I had one. I know as part of the town center process, Christy, feel free to jump in and kind of put some more technical aspects to my rambling train of thought here, is that they, they did some studies, so stuff is pre-approved, or is in terms of, the development, it was looked ahead and said, okay, we've looked and we know we can handle X, Y, Z amount of development threshold. And so any proposed development doesn't necessarily have to go through that part of the review process because it's already been approved. And does that apply to the traffic demand or the trip generation as well?
In part. I mean, there's a planned action EIS for town center that covers, I think, some of the larger issues, but there's always the SEPA aspect. If they're building something that causes a direct problem, or forces the need for some direct mitigation, you can still apply that. It's similar to traffic impact fees. The traffic impact fees, you have to pay those for some of the identified growth projects, elements of the growth projects in the city. But if there's anything directly needed due to your development, like a right turn lane or something like that, then that's more of a SEPA mitigation, and you would have to do that too.
And then sort of a follow-up question to that, because we are finally starting to look at the different neighborhood sub areas as well that haven't had that treatment that town center received. Is that something that the city would be thinking about doing for our other kind of commercial oriented sub areas as well? For the planned action ordinance? I guess that's more.
I'll let Christy come answer that one because I don't know the answer to that.
So we're doing an EIS for the comp plan, which is going to cover the subsequent development regulations after we get done with the comp plan at the end of 2024. But we don't have a specific planned action in mind. I think as we further refine some of these commercial areas and nodes that we want to orient development to, that could definitely be something that we take a look at. Their legislature also did revisions to SEPA currently that we're going to have to take a look at this year. And in a lot of cases, they're eliminating portions of SEPA that have to do with densifying development. So SEPA is becoming less and less applicable under the new framework that the legislature is working under to make sure we are getting more density in housing. So how that's all going to fit together is something that we're currently working on to see where the lay of the land is. And what that looks like. So I think that's where we get back to the nexus questions and those boundaries that are now getting set legislatively, and what local jurisdictions can and cannot do. And some of this legislation is, kind of coming hot off the press. And so we'll see what happens at this end of this next legislative session this year, tentatively scheduled to be done in March, which it sounds like it is because it's a short session, but there's a lot of pretty intense bills that are getting taken a look at right now, in addition to some of those pretty high SEPA thresholds as far as density and other things where local jurisdictions are basically being told that these developments are exempt now. So we'll be walking that new line of development.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Are there any other questions or topics you want to visit?
I have one. It's not traffic related. It's a different chapter on more utility related. When it comes to utility locations, so I guess that's 12.7. Page starts on page 49. I'm just curious if, and maybe not for this, but for the next iteration of this, maybe look at when we want to require undergrounding certain types of utility facilities, not just the undergrounding power, but maybe have them stick their transformers in a vault as opposed to, being pad mounted, depending on a given location. I'll say, as an example, the new light rail station has really large pad mounted transformers just right next to the sidewalk, just sticking out like a sore thumb. And I mean, that's the biggest example I was thinking, but one, I'd like to not have that happen in the future, but two, not just for any, I know that utilities can sometimes dictate where pad, I know like when I was at City Light would tell the developer, no, you can't put your transformer here, you got to put your pad over here. We're not going to give you the transformer until you put it where we tell you you're going to put it. Different jurisdictions are a little bit different on that, but does it exist in this guide, or can it exist in this guide where we can say to those developers, hey, no, the size of this infrastructure is not compatible with being pad mounted in this environment. We're going to make you underground it.
So I heard three things there that I think I could touch on.
Okay.
One, those.
Sorry, I was a little rambly there.
No, that was good. The big transformers on 236, which I share your disdain.
Yeah.
But we are fixing those a little bit because the transformers have these add-on boxes that were jutting out over the sidewalk, and we've got agreements with PUD to rotate those things 90 degrees, so at least the add-on box is over the non-walking area, so that should give us another foot or two of space there. I don't know how they ended up in the sidewalk. I wish I was around then. I could have tried to overrule that design, but that's what we have to work with. If there was ever an opportunity to move it in the future, I'm sure we would do it, but they're kind of there for now. We have language in the EDM for undergrounding. So right now, the current undergrounding language in the code mostly deals from the road to the development, but we want to add some stronger language for undergrounding on the frontage, not only along the frontage of the development, but if they're getting their lines from across the street, we're trying to figure out how to word that so that you don't have the lines across the street either. Not sure if that's going to make it in this edition, but undergrounding is expensive, so there's some, like the high transmission line that probably won't be undergrounded, but a lot of the local stuff, we can try to reduce the number of wires that are in front. And this is good for both the city and developers and the users, is that it gives us more resilience, it has less maintenance, and it improves our environment. So we're working on that. So to answer your question about whether it's above ground or underground, I think we're trying to move in the direction of getting more of these transformers in a vault underground. And then that kind of leads me to the design on 56 for Main Street. We are working with the utilities to relocate them underground as part of the Main Street project. And as part of that, we're moving these vaults underground, and in some places, we're trying to find locations behind the sidewalk, but that's also kind of an anti-development location because they don't have as much square footage anymore. So we're looking at trying to, each side on its own, try to figure out what's the best spot. But the developers need these transformers to make their buildings viable. So, if you need it, you got to put it somewhere. And so it's trying to find the right balance of, can we put it on private property, or is there a spot in the public right of way where it makes sense? Once you put them in, it's very expensive to move, so we don't want to have to move them if we don't have to.
So sort of on that same train of thought, does that apply also to signal boxes for our traffic lights?
Those are different. Those can't necessarily go in a vault.
Okay.
The signal technicians, when they're programming a traffic signal, they actually need to have line of sight to the equipment so that when they flip a switch here, or they plug a wire in there, they can look and see if it's working. And if they're down in a hole, that doesn't work so well. What we are trying to do to make our signal boxes a little more attractive is we're adopting some of the same programs that Linwood is using for wrapping them to try to make them more aesthetically pleasing. So we're hoping that we can have some success with that, so you don't have just your plain old stainless steel box.
Just an FYI, the unit I'm currently doing an out of class in right now permits that in Seattle. So it's part of
good.
Part of SDOT's public space management. So we permit any kind of public art in the right of way, and signal box utility box design covers that. So we permit the artwork.
It's come a long way, because I remember the old days in Seattle, we didn't let anybody paint or do anything to a signal box because you never knew if they were going to get paint in the hinges or in the lock mechanisms or whatever. But having artwork on a signal box reduces the amount of graffiti on it, and it's more, blends into the neighborhood better. So, I like the idea of having a wrap or some type of program to do that.
Yeah. From many meetings and discussions, though, with our traffic engineers, they want to make sure that artwork doesn't have font, and if it does have font, it's of a certain point size, and it's not facing traffic, because there's the thought that it'd be confusing drivers, that it's some sort of signal control, some sort of signage. No, but.
Well, yeah, there's restrictions on what can be in there. It definitely can't look like a traffic sign, and I see having any word messages facing away is probably preferable.
Yeah. Is there, I guess, when, I'm thinking down at, 56 and 236, where, the part of the Main Street development has happened, and the infrastructure, the citywide infrastructure has come in, but there isn't any kind of adjacent development yet, so the boxes kind of stick out a little bit more. Is it feasible to, relocate those boxes once development comes in? So there's still line of sight, but it's not, I guess it's not just sort of sitting out there. Kind of on an island on its own. So it's so it's sited so it blends in better with the surrounding environment, as opposed to being a visual eyesore unto itself.
Well, once a signal box is located and operational, it's expensive to move them because you have to find a better site, and then you have to pull all new wires to all the traffic signals. You can't splice them or anything. So unless there's a really strong reason to move one, once it's in place, it's tough to relocate it.
Okay. And I'm assuming when the siting for that is being reviewed, they're thinking of, how would that blend in with future development?
Hopefully they are. They're also looking at where they have physical space to put it. you know, there's always a lot of competition for, especially at intersections, what happens in the corners. You want to have a pedestrian space, you have to have a functional space for the traffic equipment, if there is any. You know, sometimes wider sidewalks for peds and bikes. There's competing needs, and so you're trying to figure out what's you know, the best you can do, and there's always going to be some compromise. If you can't move a traffic box, you know, that's why I think there's a lot of value to trying to just make it look better. We're going to have the same issue with the development at Van Ryan 236. There's a existing traffic signal cabinet on the southeast corner. And when that development comes in, we've already told them you should figure out how you want to make that blend into your design, because there's no room across the street where the plaza is going to be, the pedestrian plaza. And there's no room across the street to the north where Candela and Millstream and the trail is going to come out. So a lot of times there's just not a lot of other options, so you have to keep them where they are.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Your undergrounding question reminded me of something we talked about a little bit back when we were talking about undergrounding of utilities. I have this vague memory of maybe a little bit of discussion on, like, as we're rebuilding the street, where utilities are not currently undergrounded, if there was some way to put like a conduit or something underneath the street so that you don't have to tear up the street and then like rerun all the utilities. Did that make it in here?
I don't know if that's in here yet, but that is a practice that we want to adopt, is that if we're opening up the road, then we want to throw in a couple extra spare conduits that we could use for some future use, or somebody else could use. My goal is to have some type of a fiber optic network out there that would be of public benefit. So we're always looking to have some spare conduits in the ground when it's opened up.
Okay, cool. Yeah, if that makes it into the next iteration, but I just had forgotten about that until now. So just curious. Glad you're thinking about it.
Anyone else? Nope, not hearing.
Were there any public comments? Okay. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, I will turn the meeting over to somebody else.
They've got to open it up.
Yeah, we got to.
Oh, okay.
All right, so I'm looking for a motion to open the public hearing.
I make a motion to open the public hearing.
I have a motion to open the public hearing. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to open the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Hearing none, that motion carries. The hearing is now open. And we've already got our presentation from staff, so normally we would wait to see, if there's any public comment. Let the record show there is no public left at the meeting tonight. Just double checking, is there any public online? I know there wasn't earlier, but
There is still no public online.
no public online. Okay, so with no public to make comment, I'm looking for a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing?
I have a motion to close the public hearing. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. So let me just get quite ahead here. All righty, here we go. Okay, so at this point, I am looking for a motion.
I move to recommend approval of the proposed engineering development manual.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Hearing none, that motion carries. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Matthew Gissel. I'm the building official for the City of Mountlake Terrace. Coming to you today to try and clean up some code to make it consistent with our already adopted International Fire Code. Some of the language that is in our municipal code is in contrast to what's already adopted, so we're just trying to clean some things up so there's consistency between both our municipal code and the International Fire Code. The approval and adoption of these changes will also reflect when we change to the 2021 International Fire Code, this issue will already be resolved. So we thought prudent to resolve this now before we get to that point. So in 1510, there was a lot of references to the fire marshal. The fire marshal is not referenced in the International Fire Code. It's the fire code official. So a lot of the language just changed it from fire marshal to fire code official. There's also references to engineering service director, which no longer is a position at the City of Mountlake Terrace and has been adjusted to the city engineer to be consistent with what position replaced the old one. There was also, what was the other one? We were also bringing some provisions to be consistent with our policy and procedure, where the fire code official would work under the community economic director or their designee, and we adjust some of our definitions, either removed them because they're already in the International Fire Code, so there's no reason for redundancy, or removed them because they're inconsistent with code. We moved modifying interpretations and appeals or modifications to the code. The International Fire Code already covers that portion, so we thought it'd be prudent just to point to the fire code rather than having a redundancy. We want to make sure we're clear to all applicants to go to one place as opposed to having to look at our municipal code and then the fire code, as well as we don't want changes in the field. So we're removing this so that way we don't have one understanding of the code that can just be revised in the field by one person. So this creates checks and balances that the fire code covers much better. And that is about it. Do you have any specific questions associated with these changes?
Who is the fire code official?
Once the code gets changed, it'll be to be determined.
Is that with the fire department, or is that going to be internal to Mountlake Terrace? Do you know?
To be determined.
Okay.
So we can't have a position if it's not oriented in code. So currently in our code, it points to the South County Fire Protection District #1 Fire Chief, which no longer exists. So we need to, it's now South County Fire is who we work with. So we need to adjust this code language, and then once the code language is adopted, then we'll adjust our policy and procedure to implement the changes to the code.
Anyone else? I know this is more straightforward than the rest of our meeting. Just double checking, Commissioner Harrison, do you have any questions, comments on this one?
No questions. Actually, well, maybe a small question. I don't know if it's pertinent, but how long ago was this original code written? Is this from back in the days when, Mountlake Terrace had its own fire department?
Let me see if it has the sections down here of the different adoptions. So some of the ordinances were from 2013 or older. So yeah, unfortunately, some of the code language was just not checked to the International Fire Code. It was probably a missive oversight, so we want to course correct this before we come back to you when we're going to the 2021 code, so we can really dive into the changes between the 2018 and 2021, rather than this nuance of who's doing what position, things of that nature.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Not hearing or seeing anything, so with that, I'm looking for a motion to open the public hearing.
I make a motion to open the public hearing.
I have a motion to open the public hearing. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Public hearing is now open. Just double checking once again. For the record, there is no public, again, here in person, and still no one online. Okay, no change from like 5 minutes ago. So with no public or in person or online to make a public comment, and we've already had our questions answered from the city staff, I'm looking for a motion to close the public hearing.
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
I have a motion to close the public hearing. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next step here. I am looking for a motion.
I move to recommend approval of amendments to the Mountlake Terrace Municipal Code, Chapter 1510, regarding the fire code official.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your service.
All right. I'll make the director's report short and sweet. This evening, just a couple of things. Matthew alluded to 2021 code amendments. That's from Washington State Building Code Council. And the last couple of code adoptions for building and fire codes have been a little bit tricky. The 2018 were adopted during COVID, and we didn't know if they were going to get adopted or not up until the last minute. The same is true for these 21 amendments. The Building Code Council is still reviewing these amendments. Some of the provisions that they wanted to enact in Washington State got appealed in the state of California and were overturned. So we're preparing what we can right now, what we just did, to clear up some of our code language for the International Fire Code. And then we're getting ready to adopt what the Building Code Council puts forth as soon as we know what they're going to put forth, or if they're going to put forth any provisions this year. So we'll keep you guys abreast of that. We checked on it again today, and it seems like it's hard to tell whether that's going to be accomplished or not. They seem to be at a crossroads. Just wanted to mention at your next meeting, we're going to go over comp plan. But in addition to that, you need to elect your chair and vice chair. So that will be on the agenda as well for your next meeting on the 22nd, I believe. Yep. And then after tonight's public comment period, I will be checking on policies tomorrow and procedures and how we go forth. I would anticipate this Thursday when we are at council that there will very likely be shenanigans. And so something that sounds like it's happening in other cities that we will need to address, and how to circumvent having to listen to inappropriate things and bots and all those fun things that we're facing. I did want to point out one thing, since Matthew's in the audience, and I tell him I've been doing this for a long time. He's the best building official that I've worked with in my long tenure, and there was a very nice comment on social media last Friday about our building department, about their working with the community. And this is building inspectors, electrical inspectors, building official. And I would just like to say we've worked very hard to try to change the culture in our department when it comes to working with the community and trying to help facilitate code compliance at the same time that we're helping people try to get work done on their project. And so kudos to the building folks and the electrical folks in our office for really turning things around in the last little bit. So they deserve recognition for that. And with that, that's all I have this evening, unless anybody has any questions for me.
Any questions for Christie? Not hearing or seeing. Commissioner Harrison, do you have any questions for staff?
Not really. I mean, I was going to bring it up in the miscellaneous business portion, but I think Christie, it sounds like it's going to be discussed at the next council meeting. I was just wondering, is it possible, could we enact a sort of policy to sort of cut that, speech out, like, or sort of stop it? I feel hypocritical making a recommendation of, since I'm not there presently, but maybe, limiting public comment to write-ins or in person. I have a feeling people who, want to spread, hate speech or those sort of Zoom bombs are probably more hesitant to do it in person than they are to, sort of do it online. Is that something that's with, perhaps it'll be discussed at the council meeting, but is that something that's within our purview to sort of enact that as a policy moving forward?
We can't limit online participation. That was changed during COVID for now for public comment, but we most certainly can put some rules in place that we don't have to listen to that. And so that's what I'll be checking on to make sure we have appropriate policies in place where we could potentially limit if it is not applicable to, well, first of all, if it's racist, sexist, hate speech of any kind, you're cut off instantly. That's not going to be a problem. But also looking into if it's not applicable in general to Planning Commission's business, then I don't know that anybody needs to hear certain things at a Planning Commission or at a City Council meeting for that matter, if it's not applicable to something that you folks have any control over. So yes, I will be bringing it up tomorrow morning in our staff meeting. So happy to do that and make sure that we have some direction for the Planning Commission chair and the Planning Commission in general so we can limit that behavior moving forward.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Christie? Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and move on to item number 9, miscellaneous business by call of planning commissioners. Anybody have any miscellaneous business? Any future absences coming up? I know we have 2 for the next meeting.
Commissioner Morgan and Commissioner Stenson requested to be absent for the next meeting on January 22nd.
Anyone else going to be absent?
I'm not going to be absent necessarily, but my wife is due in about 4 weeks. So we're sort of in the anything can happen zone.
Gotcha.
So
yeah.
Just want to put it out there that I might be putting in some very late requests to be absent,
Sure.
but I don't know what that looks like yet.
Sure.
So we'll see.
And this kind of goes for everyone too, especially if it's any, emergency last minute. Hopefully you're at least able to let staff know, as a courtesy, CC me as well, just so it's on my radar. But yeah, I mean, if you can, but obviously things like that, it happens. Sending city staff an email is probably the last thing on your mind. So it's that's understandable.
We'll understand if you don't, if we're not first on
it's
your
like you keep that
dial
kid
up.
in. I've got a meeting to do. Okay. Anyone else?
Yes, I know that I will be absent on February 26th, that meeting. I know it's a ways out, but I'm going to miss the next meeting, so I want to remember now.
Gotcha. Since we kind of have a busy schedule, might as well just take care of this now. Would anybody like to make a motion to let our commissioner have an excused absence?
Yeah.
No, this is for the 26th,
This is a new one.
for the one further out.
Go for it.
Motion to
Make a
excuse.
motion to excuse Commissioner Stenson on February 26th.
All right, I have a motion to excuse Commissioner Stenson for the February 26th Planning Commission meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. All right, so you got an excused absence for the 26th. And then, next week. What's the date for the next meeting?
The 22nd.
22nd. January 22nd. Okay. All right. Anybody else have any miscellaneous business?
Does anyone want a little update from CPAG?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So the last the CPAG meeting was on last Wednesday, January 3rd. They went over they once again, the people doing the housing study went over some updated findings that they had, specifically related to 3 different alternatives for development. One, and we'll see it next meeting, except for the people who are absent. They had alternative 1, which was kind of the status quo, which we have, we'll have to do with the most updated state legislation anyways. And then a couple of different alternatives where they looked at locating different amounts of density in different areas, along with some additional information towards affordability. They were looking, pardon me as I look at my notes here from that meeting, but they also, had the group had a few questions about things like a cascade view multifamily. One of the suggestions was to sort of, there's a, they want to possibly increase density there, but also do preservation of affordable housing there at the same point. So there are a number of questions about that and the different kinds of housing typologies that they had, of course, with a view towards affordability for Mountlake Terrace, which is a medium income community. And they also went through another planning exercise that hopefully we'll get to take a look at the results and the process of the maps they did, where they looked at different activity nodes for throughout the city. And there were 2 groups at that place, and they both had different thoughts and different comments on it, but there were some continued themes of activity nodes or possible future activity nodes, a lot of them focused town center, but some of them looking a little bit further into the sub areas, possibly looking at a few different newer nodes, 2 that I can immediately think, or 3 that I can immediately think of, are possibly Forest Crest. There's abandoned church on 44th across from that trailer park near the high school, and 220th, where I-5 comes in as a possible gateway. So I think there's some ideas we could possibly take a look at there, and hopefully we'll get presented at. But I think the meat of that presentation that we got from the consultant was they did some further analysis on the different typologies of buildings that they'll be looking at, and I think the note should be from there should be up, but if you want to dig into those numbers, I'd recommend it. Any questions?
All right, great, thank you. Anybody else? Not hearing or seeing anything, just one quick maybe question for staff, or a request that staff no longer come to meetings dressed in either maize blue or anything with the letter M on it. Thank you.
I'm sad to report that Sarah is the sole reason why we lost the national championship this evening. So she will be punished accordingly tomorrow.
There you go. Make her wear something that's green, white, and says Spartans on it. For those who don't, that's Michigan State.
Her sister went to Michigan State. I found out this evening, actually.
Okay, so not hearing or seeing any other miscellaneous business, I'll go ahead and declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Recording stopped.